Well, we're going to turn back now to that story here in France. This Wednesday, authorities are preparing for mass disruption and protests with blockades on roads across the country, some already being set up. We've received pictures from a village in the north of France. You're seeing them there. Strikes also set to have an impact on schools and other public services. To get more insight on this day in disruption and indeed about this movement, the Block Everything movement, we can speak now to Associate Professor of Sociology at the University College London, author of a recent book called The Rise of the Masses, Spontaneous Mobilization and Conscientious Politics, Benjamin Abrams. Thanks for coming back and trying this again for your time. Can I ask you, firstly, with your eye on history and looking at the current situation in France, how big do you think this latest series of unrest may be for France, this latest mass movement?
Well, this could be the start of something quite big indeed. Part of this, of course, depends on how the new Le Cornu government responds to the actions today. But what's different about what's happening today is, unlike the yellow vests, unlike the pension march, the focus here is really on disrupting key elements of national infrastructure and creating what we sometimes call an exceptional situation, something that draws even more people than those already politicized into larger and larger protests by disrupting their daily routines and patterns.
Indeed, even the name of this group, Block Everything, it's clearly aimed at disrupting as widely as possible and even proposing various ways for people to protest, including, just not using your credit card this Wednesday. What do you think about that and what impact could that have on this movement?
So one of the big upsides of this kind of protest is it can appeal to a wide range of different people who might have different kinds of affinities for participation. Some people can't necessarily go down and sit down and block a road, but they can refrain from using their bank card or other such things. The downside of that is that some of these actions are going to be less visible. And that might mean that we don't necessarily see the full scope of participation until maybe the days following the protest, when we realize the true impact it's had.
Now, France has a bit of a reputation for being quick to strike or being, numerous to strike and take protest action. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there are differences in national culture, but there are also differences in the constraining factors in society that allow people to access protest. And France has been always a society where the patterns of daily life are very conducive to taking to a political cause. Some people would say that that's one of the strengths of its democracy, even though it sometimes causes disruption like this.
How often, though, are mass movements like this successful in, their demands in getting change?
Well, it's often hard to gauge success. By some metrics, this movement has already succeeded in securing the fall of the Bayrou government. The real question is, however, will it secure the fall of the Bayrou plan? And it's really difficult sometimes to ascertain, even in the days or weeks following a protest, whether a movement will succeed or fail. Sometimes we only figure it out by looking at the limited scope of change implemented by its opponents. So it may be, for example, that the new Le Cornu government implements a more modest version of the Bayrou plan or no plan at all. That would be counted as some kind of success, although I get the sense that if these protests really magnify, they could lead to a toppling of the entire Macron presidency.
Indeed. I wonder often, here in France, it seems to be money matters. You speak there of the budget that brings people out onto the streets. But is there, more widely, what is the spark that ignites such mass movements, that gets people to actually come together in such large numbers?
So my research shows that there are three kinds of conditions that tend to trigger involvement in mass protests like this. The first of those kind of exceptional situations that I mentioned, these disruptions to daily life or to the norms that govern daily life. But there are also moments where people sense the personal opportunity to protest, when the costs or benefits swing in their favor for a brief period of time. We saw that during, for example, the collapse of police repression during the Egyptian revolution, where suddenly tons of Egyptians poured onto the streets. And often, if there's a big showdown with the police and the police are defeated on the streets, that can bring many more people into protest.
Well,
Finally, there's one other condition. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, but just before...
finally,
tell me
one other condition.
Sorry, excuse me. Tell me the final condition before I jump in.
The one other The one other condition is sometimes called a paramount situation. Those are circumstances in which a big threat to the public, to democracy, or to a group that people care about motivates people to come out in support. And that's the kind of thing we might see if there's very harsh police repression of these protests, that ordinary people will come out and support them, not because they necessarily believe in the protesters' cause, but because they believe in their humanity and want to defend them.
Can I just, because you are coming to us from the UK and we have seen, the police move in, that terrorism law being passed for people holding, pieces of cardboard on the streets of the UK, what do you make of that and people's reaction in the UK from what they've seen from the police last weekend?
Well, yes, I think myself and many other observers have been very surprised by the course of action that has been taken in relation to the Defend Our Juries movement. But it's also the case that British law leaves little room for manoeuvre for the police. They are compelled to enforce terrorism law. And my sense is that there is as much confusion among police officers who seem to be rather reluctant to enforce these laws as there is among the general public.
Benjamin Abrams, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. But thank you very much again for your time and joining us here on France 24.